setting up this next session from Los Angeles to Lake Worth Beach and back to Santa Clara County and beyond. Movements across the nations are dedicated to transgender economic empowerment and addressing employment, housing, legal justice, and more. This amazing group, of experts will provide an overview of current programmatic focuses across regions, shared lessons learned, and discussions on future priorities to inspire what we aim to achieve locally. So I would like to bring up to the stage, I see Michael on. So Michael is the Director of Marketing for the new Transgender Economic Empowerment Program for Compass Community Center located in Lake Worth, Florida. From an early age, Michael knew that she had feelings that were not normal. In the 1980s, there were few resources for transgender people, and in many cases, no one knew that transgender people existed. At the age of 10, she tried to express feelings of gender dysphoria to a family member, and the reaction she received convinced her to hide how she felt for 27 years. Today, Michael happily works at Compass and is in the process of transitioning from male to female. Unlike many transgender individuals, she goes by any pronoun and is keeping her birth name. She has a BS in communications and a master's in educational leadership. Michael is a firm believer that transgender people should live openly and proudly when it is healthy for them to do so, and advocates for equal rights before and better mental health services for transgender people. Everybody give it up for Michael.
Thank you for having me. This is a real honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. And I also want to just introduce in today's panel, Eden Luna. Eden is a Latina, trans feminine, non-binary person. Luna uses they and she pronouns in English, as well as ella pronouns in Spanish. They are the program manager for the Los Angeles LGBT Center's Transgender Economic Empowerment Project, otherwise known as TEEP. TEEP offers holistic support for transgender people in need of legal and economic services. Their services include court-ordered legal name and gender marker changes, career development skills, employment authorization documents, criminal recording clearing, and advocacy in gender-based discrimination incidents. TEEP also offers gender and sex DEI trainings to corporations, small businesses, shelters, schools, and law enforcement agencies. Their goal is to shift the cultural movement toward trans-inclusive services. Luna serves as a council member for the Trans Advisory Council, otherwise known as TAC, for the City of Los Angeles, as well as a board member for the Trans Advisory Board for the City of West Hollywood. They work with the community to implement policies and procedures for the socioeconomic advancement of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people in Los Angeles. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Luna grew up in a low-income migrant single-parent family that struggled with poverty and domestic violence. When they stated their transition, they didn't know of other non-binary people. They now use their voice and platform to amplify the experiences of disenfranchised groups with their perspective on intersectionality. Everyone, welcome to the stage, Luna. And I myself, my bio is pretty short. Sera, she, her pronouns. I work with the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. I do a lot of things when it comes to transgender economic empowerment. And if you want to follow our work, you could easily go into the County of Santa Clara's board sites, and you could type in transgender recruitment and retention, and you can find all the scope of work that we had. But I'm more than happy to discuss that within today's conversation across jurisdictions. So folks, we're going to be talking today a little bit about some of the work that we do within transgender economic empowerment. I am so honored to be able to hold this space with y'all and talk about some of the new work that we're doing. I know, Michael, within your bio, transgender economic empowerment is something that's fairly new within Lake Worth. And I know Luna within the work in LA County and City of Los Angeles, that work has been going on for a while. But I'm just going to open up the conversation. I just want to know a little bit about, other than stuff that was mentioned in your bio. And Michael, I guess I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the work that you do.
Hi, my name is Michael Riordan. Thank you very much for the introductions. Like Sarah said, I am in Lake Worth, Florida, which if you don't know where that is, not to worry, most people don't. I am in Palm Beach County. And to give it a little, probably to really let you know exactly where we are, Mar-a-Lago, which is where Donald Trump lives now, is about 3 miles away from our center. So, we're always on alert and we're always watching. But I work as the director of marketing for Compass Community Center as the whole thing. And our Transgender Economic Empowerment program is nascent. It's new. We're working on it. I just saw somebody say that they're from Lake Worth. So you probably know Compass Community Center, I hope. Yeah, it's a new program. It's a new program. So it's a pleasure to be here today to give insight in how these things are when they're starting up, or what problems we've run into, or roadblocks, not even roadblocks, but the different things that we're witnessing as we're trying to get this program really off the ground. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Michael. How about yourself, Luna? Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of that work that you do within the TEEP program and LA LGBT Center.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the beautiful introduction. And so it's an honor to be here. I think there's so much that can be said, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is I have a passion to give back to my communities. I have been a recipient of social services growing up, especially as a homeless youth, coming out of an abusive household, coming out as my own identity, and now I have the honor of being able to serve and give back to my community. Many of the people who are amongst my peers, my friends, my family, my chosen family. And so I think all of this comes from a passion of giving back. And then this has only continued to snowball as we continue to see more and more demand for services, whether it's economic empowerment, trainings for employers, support for many other affirming agencies that want to serve the community. And I don't know if anyone else is also feeling this as well, but in LA, the demand is ever increasing. People keep coming to us, asking for services, asking for education and awareness. And there's just never enough, but we have to keep going. We have to keep giving back. And I'm just so grateful to hear that now with Compass and many other places across the nation that we're seeing more and more trans economic empowerment initiatives launching across the country. I can't tell you how often I hear from members of the community coming from Oklahoma or from Arkansas or from Mexico or from another country because they're finding that they're looking for that resource here in LA, but we need more support across the country, across the world. And so this is where my work passion comes from, and I'm honored to be here on this panel representing what we're doing at the center.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Luna, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that has been informing the programs that you've created. So how does the experiences and the realities of the trans, non-binary, intersex and gender expansive community help inform some of the programs that are currently at TEEP and at the LA LGBT Center?
You know, it's funny. So our project is about a little over 12 years old now. And we originally started off as an HIV prevention program, largely to focus on the survival-based work that was happening in the city of West Hollywood, where many of our members of the community experiencing homelessness, were engaging in underground economies, and we wanted to provide an avenue for folks so that way they can find employment, to find stability outside of underground economies. And so while we started off with this initiative helping prevent HIV, along the way over the 12 years, we found many different intersecting issues that continue to affect trans people's livelihood, whether it's finding affirming housing, whether it's finding an affirming employer, finding the job skills, the education, whether it's someone trying to learn English coming into the country, whether it's someone trying to learn how to prepare a resume, or even just addressing barriers that have prevented them from getting into the workforce, addressing criminal records, addressing a history of financial instability, bad credit, just knowledge, domestic violence. There's so many things that are intersecting here, and when they really say that, you know, trans people are the most marginalized of the most marginalized, and trans, non-binary, intersex, gender expansive people are, it really is the case. We see people who are intersecting with not only just identities, but also experiences, and addressing economic empowerment, it really takes a village. And so we're fortunate at the center to be able to have other services like our youth housing, our senior housing, our case management for mental health, our primary health clinic, our social service, our education and trans lounge for folks who want to learn more about how to transition socially or so on. And we're really lucky we have all that here at the center, but it really takes a village, and that's why it's so important, not even just in LA, but across the world, that we have to learn to build those partnerships with other nonprofits, with other collaborators, with other comrades, to be able to set up those institutions in a pipeline, so people who are looking for a job can also find help with securing therapy, securing mental health, securing healthcare that's affirming with competent providers, securing housing, securing all of these additional steps that ensure that that person who is being housed, who's being led to employment, has the stability so they don't fall back to the cracks. And so I think that's what I've seen in our project here in Los Angeles County. I don't know if this resonates with everyone else here, but that's very much so the case here.
Yeah, I think it resonated in a lot of the discussions that we have. And I know it even resonated, I had a similar conversation with Michael. Michael, for folks that aren't familiar, I know there's one person, Kelly, that is from Lake Worth. So they can talk a little bit about Lake Worth. I'm going to have you the ability to talk about Lake Worth. Can you talk a little bit about the trans, non-binary, intersex, or gender expansive community, and what has led to the creation of the Transgender Economic Empowerment program for Compass? And I know this was also created during the pandemic. So congrats to y'all to be able to create a program during the pandemic. But feel free to share a little bit about the program that you have there in Lake Worth, Florida.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, and thank you for saying that's awesome. But we weren't planning to start it during the pandemic. You know, like most of us, I don't think any of us were planning to do things in this kind of an environment. But you know, in Lake Worth, it's a bit different, and I'm trying to think. I know that, you know, I'm 3 hours away by time zone, and in a different part of the country, and I'm on a call with a bunch of people that work in California, which in our minds, at least in my mind, is a more welcoming place for things like this. South Florida, Southeast Florida in particular, there's Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami County. And it's like this little pocket of safety for us over here. And then as soon as you get out of there, you know, going north until you hit Orlando, there's not another LGBTQ community center. And Orlando's 3 hours away driving, you know, so it's a distance. So we have a different situation down here where this isn't as loud as it probably could be. We're also new. So the way that it started is the Jewish Women's Foundation of the Palm Beaches said, we have some grant money and we're really interested in working with Compass. What could we do? And the JWF here has a really strong, their whole theme this year, and I don't know if it's because of what we're doing led to this or, you know, the other way around, but they want to empower women to do things like and get into work and things like that. So this conversation started, and we were saying, you know, the intersectionalities, when you look at the trans community, you know, you're taking people who are part of a marginalized community, and then you add all of the other intersections and you get to a point where you have people that are really, really, really in need. So we said, and it was actually my boss, the chief development officer, said, what if we try to help people get jobs? What if we try to help trans women and trans people get employment? Because we know that that's a big problem. That's a huge hole. And that's, you know, we're talking about, you know, health insurance, access to care, mental health services, all of that stuff. Still in the United States, it is so attached to our employment. You know, yeah, you can get some of these other things, but the employer programs are really where those top services exist. So our desire to get trans people out into the workforce is significant, but it's a two-pronged thing. It's not just getting trans people and getting them ready with, you know, interview skills and resume writing. We even have some grant money, and we have a partnership with Macy's to help people get clothes for interviews, or if they need a certain type of clothing for their, get their clothing for the actual job. That's one part of it. The other part is making sure that the employers out there are ready to have and support transgender employees. And that is a major piece of what we do. We call it our cultural competency training, but it's a DEI training for the LGBTQ community. And now we've been giving that for years. And so we thought that it would work really well with the program, and we really are, again, we're at if it wasn't for the pandemic, I think we'd be further along. But we've started this, and we're at that point where we're just getting all of the things moving in the right way, and we are seeing an impact. And I know that it's going to come up a little bit later, but one of the barriers that we're discovering is that we came in up here, I think, with the desire to help people get jobs, and what we're finding is a lot of the people contacting us have more basic needs than jobs. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously, like across the nation, there's a systemic barriers for employment for folks that aren't only of trans lived experience, but also other intersecting identities. Luna, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about stuff that you folks are advocating for. I know things like the Equality Act, super important as a bill that needs to be passed, right? We're also talking about more research funding. One thing that we're doing here in county is a countywide trans employment survey that's happening this fall. So stay tuned, folks. Make sure you follow us, Office of LGBTQ Affairs, or myself. So yeah, I'll share that later. But there's also bills like AB 2218. So that's the California bill, the Trans Health Equity Bill, that allows a lot of folks that do the work, that do the services, empowering them to be able to offer more services by allowing for grant funding. So Luna, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, some of the systemic barriers and how that's informing a lot of the policy and program work that you folks are doing at LA LGBT Center and the TEAP program there.
Yes, no, and you hit the nail on the head. I think the Equality Act is so integral to a lot of the advocacy work we're doing in our policy department. I don't work in the policy department, but we work very closely with them and informing them. Here's what's happening on the ground. Here's what we're seeing with our members of the community. Here's the barriers that we're witnessing. And how can we translate this into either a budget or some kind of policy in the Assembly or Senate bills to be able to help advocate for our community on a larger scale. We have the on the ground level and also on the larger scale. And the Equality Act also is part of that effort in the federal level in just securing a very fundamental, basic, explicit understanding of protections beyond just sex, but sex, gender identity, expression, and all the other categories. Right now, we're looking at, on the federal level, we're looking at everything from the lens of a very liberal, expanded definition of how we define sex. But when you go across state to state, the way we define that is very, very different. Many of the folks who we're working with who are looking for jobs or looking for legal recourse around name change services, if they're born in Texas, they have to deal with the very strict definitions of how we define sex and gender. They won't accept the gender marker change in California, but they'll accept a sex change. And it's so nuanced like that, but it's really so important. And it shows why it's important to be explicit of beyond just employment, but housing and public accommodations and restrooms and healthcare and so many different institutions that we don't just exist in a bubble. We're operating every day as our authentic selves in many different sectors, and having something like the Equality Act would be integral to make sure that at the very basic level that we have some degree of protection. Will this make all discrimination go away? No. We have protections here in California, and even though we're seen as a more progressive state, it still happens here. We're dealing with discrimination requests all the time. The challenge is, if there's no law, then people have less recourse to be able to pursue some kind of justice if something does happen. And so the Equality Act is integral to be able to make sure that across the nation we have those protections. In California, as you mentioned, the Transgender Health and Wellness Fund is also instrumental in securing that smaller trans-led nonprofits are able to secure funding for their services. We're at the center, we're very privileged to be able to have a very generous amounts of budgets, grants, and wealth, but many smaller nonprofits and mutual aid efforts definitely need to support. And so it's so important that if you also have dollars and you're a supporter, you have donors, please direct them over to the small nonprofits to be able to support their integral services. And also, alongside with that, having something in the budget to just recognize trans people need services is so monumental, and definitely applause to the folks of the organization who make that happen. Beyond that effort, there's so many smaller advocacy, so much smaller advocacy levels being done on the state and local levels, just to ensure that trans people have access to affirming documents, that employers are being mandated to be able to get diversity, equity, inclusion trainings for gender and sexual diversity, for updates for restroom policies. There's so many efforts that we're involved in at the center on the policy level, but it really just takes a village to be able to make everything happen from the local level all the way to the federal level. And as trans people, we have to be ongoing advocates for ourselves, staying informed, supporting these legislative efforts, and if possible, directing donations from our friends and families to these orgs as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned Texas, and my heart just sank. I guess I did leave my heart in Texas. I've never even been, but with the current state of reproductive rights. And I don't know if folks know this on the call, but in terms of some of the anti-trans legislation that has been going on throughout this past year, the one that was introduced that quickly escalated was the not allowing trans athletes to join in sports. And fortunately, that didn't go through. I saw Michael
in Florida.
In Florida as well. Yes, that's true too.
It's the law now. It is the law in Florida.
So you see these like, and the thing is, because I spoke at a women's rally at the Women's March here locally, and one thing that I forgot to include is that, like, yes, reproductive rights, very like something that we need to fight for. But when we think about some of the legislation that's passing through, you have something as big as reproductive rights, while there's these little small bills that are getting introduced, especially anti-trans bills that are being filtered through. So if you look at reproductive rights as the main thing, and you lose focus on some of the other anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ bills that are out there, those things are going to pass. So when we think about, equal rights, we really have to look across the board and not treat one with higher priority than the other, right? So it's something that it's like, oh, I forgot to bring that up in my speech, but it's something that I think is very important. One thing I want to highlight too is that y'all do the work, and we have, and I want to acknowledge a lot of the trans, non-binary, gender expansive folks that are on this call. They look to you folks as leaders within the community. Can you share a little bit about your lived experience as a job seeker in the various positions that you held? And what draws you to this work of trans economic empowerment and really fighting for the community and fighting for your identity? It is something that is very courageous and something that is very honorable. So talk to us a little bit about your experiences, either in the positions that you hold, or your experience just navigating the workplace. Michael, I'll go ahead and get started with yourself.
Sure. So real quick, I really love what y'all just said about the bills and the laws and all those things. And it's not the end all be all, but it's definitely steps in the right direction, right? To get those protections. Living in a state that literally just passed that just god awful law. And I have to be careful because I work for a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. So I'm not allowed to get political, but I'm told all the time I can advocate. And just for a little background of the kind of the politics and the will that exists in Florida, the entire number of transgender youth who wanted to play sports in the entire history of the public school system of the state of Florida. So not this year, not last year, the entire history, 12 kids. And the entire legislative session was dedicated, parts of their slots, to making sure that the one or two kids out there that are, can't play sports. It's just mind-boggling. So you say, what's the mindset job searching? When I came out later in life, I came out when I was 36. And I think probably a lot of people here are going to understand that for me, it wasn't just a, oh, hey, I'm going to start living my life authentically. It was a moment of survival for me, where if I did not transition, I would no longer be on this planet. And so some of the things that I really did worry about, I was working as a real estate agent at the time, as a realtor, and going into houses by yourself with people that you don't know, in a transition. I got really scared, and I'll be honest with you, I contacted my broker and I said, listen, when this goes on a little bit further, I'm not going to be able to do this in the way that I have been. And that moment for me, whereas, and I'm just going to say it, 36 years I lived as a white cisgender male in the United States. What do you worry about? What do you have to, and all of a sudden that switched. And it switched in a major, major way. And I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for Compass, if it wasn't finding Compass, if it wasn't going into Compass, and I went for a gender support meeting and walked into this beautiful building. And I said to somebody, I was like, I don't care what I have to do to work here. I will mop floors. I just need to be here. And that's basically kind of how it all worked. I was incredibly fortunate. That was one job opening at that time in an LGBTQ center. Other people don't have that same experience. I joke around all the time that for a trans woman who wants to do marketing for an LGBTQ center, I mean, Google it, look it up. There's probably, only a handful of those positions in the whole entire country, and I got one of them. What about the people that don't have that opportunity? What happens to us? What happens to the trans people who are out there that have that fear and that I had, and don't have the opportunity to walk into a center and just, start working there? There are all of these things out there, and that's what draws me in particular to this work, is making sure, because you can get to the situation where you're talking about what comes first, right? Housing insecurity, food insecurities, or work. You can start to not have those insecurities if you have a job, but it's really difficult to get a job if you have those insecurities. So it's this kind of catch-22 situation that I think so many of us find ourselves.
Oh, Michael, we lost you just for a little bit, but we'll get back to Michael. How about you?
And it's time we've got. Am I back?
Yeah,
all right. Sorry. Now, the problem is I get a notification on my screen if the internet is going down a little bit, and it doesn't happen until after I come back. So I don't know what the last thing you heard there was. I'm sorry. But I was saying, there's this catch-22 for most of us, where what do you take care of first? Housing insecurities, food, hunger, or getting the job. And how do you get a job without having a home? I mean, it's just this, you're talking about institutionalized parts that can be oppressive or can hold people back. And you see that everywhere. Outside of gender variations, throw gender variations into the mix and it just explodes. And so it's really important for us to look at what the barriers are for trans people accessing work, and trying to solve and to help. Not solve, we're never going to solve, but doing the work, the day in, day out work to get things better. That's why I think for all of you listening, and Luna, it's great, advocacy is so important. We say at Compass, education leads to understanding, understanding leads to acceptance. And that's where we are. We have a huge opportunity to educate people as to what's going on, and living and working in a society that's built on binary pillars of male and female.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. How about yourself, Luna? What draws you to the work, and what has led you to leading some of the respective programs that you continually lead?
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience to Michael. I mean, I've come out as non-binary about 8-9 years ago. Back when I only heard it from Tumblr. That might age me there. But at the time, I didn't really see representation for non-binary people. And at the time, I didn't think non-binary was part of the trans experience. I thought that these were separate ideas. And so I never really saw myself fitting in. I would like wear skirts, I would dress femininely, I would do my makeup going into like work or an internship or something before I landed here. And I think like for the most part, I tried to work in safe spaces, but nowhere was 100% safe. And so I was constantly navigating this balancing act of like vulnerability and safety at the same time. And I just at some point I realized that it was either work in a space that would see me 100% or in some ways like be miserable in these workplaces. And so I think for me as a non-binary person, the experience is definitely a lot different than a person who is transitioning and in this, well, not to say that transition is the same, but rather it's a very different experience transitioning in the workplace and going through medical transition, which I didn't do until much later in life. And I think with that, I have to say, like Michael, it's interesting working with members of the community who have very different lived experiences than I do, and trying to support them and trying to offer the connections to be able to find employment and find stability. And so I want to acknowledge the certain privileges and differences and intersections of my experience as a relatively light-skinned Latina person versus a Black trans woman. And so with that said, I think ultimately what I've learned in this work and what I've been doing to be able to be a better accomplice to the Black trans liberation movement is identifying the resources and support networks to be able to make this happen. I think whether you're listening from LA, whether you're listening to from Florida, from anywhere in the world, you have to realize that you don't have to do this alone. When I came out at my workplace, it was only possible for me to come out because there was another trans person there who was able to lead the way there. And so it's a constant, what's the word, like a leveling system where we're setting up the ground for the next person to take the ball, or we're setting up the foundation so the next person could do better. We're walking so the next person can run. And I think finding that community, finding that support, whether it's a local community resource center, whether it's online, finding a chosen family to be able to talk and say, hey, this happened at work. This has happened to you all. Can I do anything about it? Or where are you all finding resources for affirming workspaces? How are you all navigating hormone therapy or name change on the job? And to be able to know that you're not the only one. I think that is definitely, whether you're white, Black, Indigenous, Two-Spirit, non-binary, intersex, that will go so far. I think alongside with that, I think it's also accepting that the job that you medically transition in, or the job you socially legally transition in, it may not be your forever job. It may just be the job for the moment, and it serves its purpose. You got your paycheck, you got your home, you got your apartment. And then when you're more comfortable and more confident to apply for the next job, that might be where you succeed. But don't see this one challenge, this one roadblock at the moment as the end post and that discourages you from going further. No, this is only temporary, and this also shall pass too. And so in summary, just look at the resilience of the community around you. You're not alone, and there's a brighter future for you ahead.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned, Luna, give me goosebumps, because I was just thinking about it, how you mentioned that this is not your forever job. Before I worked at the county, I worked at Microsoft for a really long time. And in terms of kind of like setting the stage as to kind of like, there were no resources here. There was the Billy DeFrank Center. So shout out to the Billy DeFrank Center, LGBTQ community space that we have here in Santa Clara County. They had support groups, but in terms of like navigating the space, I had to look all the way up. Like no one in my my office identifies trans, better, let alone like LGBTQ, and having to go up and just kind of like Google like LGBTQ Microsoft, and it pointed me into the direction of an employee resource group. So I didn't even have access to a resource group until I did the research on my own. And in finding that resource group, I worked for Microsoft for years, but just because of the fact that not only did they have benefits, but just being able to explore within that resource group how they valued resource groups as a way to be able to advise on programs, policy, and what I love about Microsoft, and we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company, right? Benefits. And I stayed with Microsoft for a really long time. And before I decided to medically transition, and similar to Michael in a lot of ways where I transitioned later in life, I stayed with Microsoft so long because my surgery date was 2 years out. And there was no, like, I didn't care about what wage I made. I didn't care about, like, my goal when I was working at a tech company is to not get fired. I can't get fired because I need this surgery. And to shell out $200,000 for surgeries out of my own pocket, and you have to understand that this is how trans folks are left within the margins, especially when it comes to not having that kind of type of healthcare that affirms your gender. And I'm not saying that trans folks have to get any kind of surgery or have to, like, everyone has their own different journey, and that's totally valid. However, when it comes to my journey and my experience, like, it was like survival mode. Don't lose the job. And once you get the job, like once you find your forever job, I'm thinking this is my forever job. Shout out to the county. But like just being able to hold on there and find your authenticity and help and support the organization you're in. Maybe they could learn a little bit from you and change the policies. Everyone here is kind of like those change makers. Michael, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to comment on something that you were saying, or that I realized in a different way, maybe, that as you were speaking, we're not asking for much. We're asking for the right to exist, right? That we want to be who we are. Yes, we have to fight a little bit harder than other people to become that person, right? I technically think that trans people have an advantage because we need to know ourselves so well and have such a deep understanding before we start to transition or something like that. We have a leg up there, but we're treated not like that, you know? And so having to fight just to be seen is a huge barrier. And that's why the work that we're doing, and listen, it's moving in the right direction. We can look at the laws in Florida, like the banning, really, it's not even trans guys, it's trans girls. They don't want trans girls playing on high school sports teams. Those are knocks. Those, you look at that and you're like, ah. But when you look around broader and you see some of the top companies in the country recognizing and seeing trans people, offering those benefits. I mean, I know that there are some very, very large companies out there that are making, efforts in a major way to make sure that trans people are seen. And so we're going in the right direction, I believe. We have a long way to go. But with us working from kind of like the grassroots and some of these other companies coming from the way down, we're going to get to the point where we meet in the middle at some point, and I'm looking forward to that. But it's because of the work that all of you are doing that we're going to get there faster.
Absolutely. And I know it was mentioned earlier, so let's pivot back into some of the work that y'all do in terms of working with some of these systemic injustices within the work that y'all do within Transgender Economic Empowerment. When you started to pull that thread in terms of like, okay, well, like for example, one of the key things that were brought up here in my county is that, oh, well, if we're looking for equitable employment, all we need to do is hire more trans women, right? Like, it's obvious, like, oh yeah, you need more trans folks to work in the workplace. Let's just hire more trans women. Is it that simple though? So I know it's some of the work that y'all do, and I might be able to share some stories. When you pulled that thread and when you continue to dive deeper into the work that y'all do, what are some of the things that you found? What are some of your discoveries in terms of, I know we talked about the unhoused community, food insecurity, low wages, folks dealing in sex work, even BIPOC folks facing greater amounts of marginalization and discrimination. And this was brought to light within the last 2 years, like the great amounts. I know that This year alone, 37 trans folks have lost their lives due to anti-trans violence. And that's just the marginalization and the realities that trans folks face, especially folks of intersecting identities. So if you folks could talk a little bit about some of the things that you found as you continue to dive deeper into the work that y'all do.
Luna, do you mind if I jump in real quick? One of the biggest barriers that we've really encountered is finding people that want to be in the program. I'm just going to come right out and say it. We live in a place where if you can pass, it's kind of safer to pass. And I love hearing, and when you're in a room with people that get it, it. And I know that Sera and Luna, you get it. You're talking about the different experiences that trans people have. When I came out, and it was just like 6 years ago, the trans people that ran the group were pushing really for the binary trans experience. You have to go all female, you have to go all male. I was like, well, it's not an option for me. And when I'm around people that know the terms, I don't identify as a trans woman. I identify as non-binary trans feminine. It seems to fit a little bit better. But the issue for us is how do you get people who don't mind, that need the help, and identify as trans publicly, or want to be seen as trans, or think that getting help from the program isn't going to make it harder for them to get a job because you have a third person coming in or a third party coming in to try to help. And because they are trans, employers can look at it as like, what is this headache that I'm going to adopt? Or what is, I don't, and these things, and then they don't know what they don't know. So that is one of the bigger barriers that we're discovering, is actually getting the trans people to hear about the program, recognize that it's something that we can help with. And because of limitations on the grant right now, we pitch it as economic empowerment. But what happens when somebody calls up and says, hey, listen, I would love to have a job, but I'm sleeping in my car. What can you help me with that? And that is problematic for us because we don't necessarily have grant money to deal with that. And I have to ask them, and I don't ask in a way that's probing, but I make a statement that the other services that we have at our center that can help with that are linked to HIV positivity status. So if you are in your car and you're not positive, where do you go? What's there for you now at Compass? We will do what we can, and we go through great lengths to try to get people. And that's why we were saying, the biggest discovery for us is not only getting people to come in, but when people do come in, being able to meet them where they are, not where we think they should be. That's the key for us. By the way, Luna, I love your little finger clap. I might adopt that.
That's like me nodding. I think I picked it up from Leomi. She's an icon. Where was I? Oh, so on the note of pulling the thread, I think Michael said it perfectly. I think this project went through several evolutions to be able to help address these needs. We're fortunate at our center that we have a slightly more robust housing program for youth and seniors, and some for HIV positive folks and some for mental health needs. But it's like Michael said, at least with the nonprofit experience, a lot of it's associated with grants, a lot of it's associated with funding dollars and where those dollars are coming from. And so going back to the policy point where we have this California Wellness Fund for trans and gender diverse people, of course, for trans-led organizations, our center won't be eligible for that, but other nonprofits will be eligible for that, and more opportunities for housing will emerge, specifically for people of trans experience. In LA, we actually just launched, not our agency, but our community launched a trans women only housing project, which is the first of its kind. But we're still missing opportunities for our trans men, our non-binary intersex people who may also be experiencing homelessness. But a lot of the development that we've had to do in our respective area is educating our shelters that were in the area. And I'm going to be transparent here. We can do all the training that we want to do, but staff turnover at shelters is pretty high, and we can't always guarantee that when a trans person walks in that the receptionist or the case manager is going to be completely competent. We can't guarantee it, but at the very least we have the protections to be able to do something if something does happen, or file a grievance, or we have options here in LA. I think it's going to be a different landscape across the world and across the country here. But I think it's so important that we realize that economic empowerment is not just getting a job. It's so many different things. And when you layer on top of it the intersections of being Black and trans, being a two-spirit person and trans, being non-binary, these are all different experiences. And we're not playing oppression Olympics. We're not seeing who's the most oppressed or who's the most marginalized, but rather how can we advocate for the most, how can we advocate for each other, especially the people who are experiencing the brunt of the issues of discrimination, of houselessness, of violence, and murder and death. How can we advocate for those people so the rest of us are protected? We're not safe until the very last one of us is safe and protected. And so, like Michael mentioned, my experience medically transitioning is very different from a person who's medically transitioning as well on the streets, going on hormones, recovering from surgery. Like, I've had clients who got FFS and they're still on the streets. And it's like, how do you survive that? But this trans community is so resilient. And I think there's so much of an emphasis on resiliency, but I think we also have to be radically soft and support one another. We can't always be the strong ones all the time, and we have to be there for each other. And so you're not doing this alone, like I said earlier. And we have to work with our cisgender heterosexual allies, even though it's difficult and even though they don't always get it. We have to do something. We have to build a partnership to be able to make ends meet, because our nonprofits can't do it alone. And if you're able to, donate to mutual aid, donate to smaller scale, non-official nonprofit efforts to be able to securely house refugees, immigrants, homeless folks who need the support, and invest in their education and their future, not just their surgery funds, but also the efforts that will be able to secure that they're healthy and alive for the next year.
Speaking of working with allies, I know that you folks do a lot of trainings, a lot of recommendations, a lot of consultation with groups, and it could be as big as a tech company, as small as like a community-based organization or a nonprofit. But what can we do to hold those folks accountable once we deliver kind of like our recommendations, our considerations, our consultations, or even our trainings? How do we hold organizations and institutions to create gender inclusive policy, or establish implicit bias trainings, or even create a more equitable, more accountable workplace for trans, non-binary, gender expansive, and intersex folks to feel accepted?
I don't know if in most places we're there yet. I really think that the work is still needing to be done. And I think of the conversations, and you're right, at the Centerline, I said this earlier, we do trainings, and I've given hundreds of hours to trainings, to nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, for-profits, whatever. And I've seen something starting to change from when I started working and doing them about 5 years ago. The questions were different. The things that people wanted to know about were different. It used to center a lot on our bodies and what's going on and surgeries and stuff. And, if I was going to get a question, that brave person in the audience, we even used to make it anonymous. I would go in and I would say, write down a question on this piece of paper. Don't put your name on it. Put it in this basket, and I'll randomly go in and pull one out and I'll answer them so that people didn't know. Those questions are starting to get less, in my opinion. And what's happening is I think that people are starting to see trans people. Unfortunately, as with anything with change, there are going to be the people out there that push back, right? So the bills that we're seeing, limiting transgender youth in sports or bathroom usage, those, in my opinion, are kind of like the last dying gasps of a binary society fighting to remain binary. Overall, the bigger goal, I think of it all the time, is the expression "a rising boat raises," or "rising tide raises all boats," right? For me, yes, we can help the individual person get a job, and that's a huge, valuable piece of time. But the place that I think we are having a more global impact is in the training and the education. It's being seen, it's being out there, it's being well met. And I hate to say it like that, but it's so crucial, you know, to be the person that can walk into a room and know what you're talking about and teach people what these things are and showing them, and yes, showing them that we're just human beings like them, that it's not, you know, we're not boogie people in the waiting in the bathrooms to hurt people. We're not just these weirdos that want to put on wigs and dresses and stuff, you know, like, we are real human beings. And being seen is so crucial and so important, but educating, getting out there, standing in front of people, giving people the messaging, showing them that, yeah, and somebody put in the chat, you know, what happens if you put, you know, you submit a resume with 2 different names on it, or you've worked for trans organizations? Are you tagging yourself? Are you letting people know? And is that going to cost you jobs? And I'm with you. I saw that and I was like, that's absolutely right. But until we get to that point where most people know and understand, I mean, think about gay liberation for the last 40 years. These are the types of conversations that gay and lesbians were having 40, 50 years ago. And now it's not as, you know, that's not as big a thing. It's coming, but the education is so crucial. And sorry, I'm really starting to rant there, but education.
I think I'll just add to that, that like Michael hit the nail on the head there too. I think right now I feel like even though we've had about 50 years in the movement on gay trans liberation and a lot of the efforts there, I think as far as the workplace goes, we're at the very early beginning conversations of trying to create inclusive workplaces and implementing policies, recommendations, not just with our center, not just with Compass, but also like at HRC with their transgender toolkit across the nation, with Trans Can Work, with many other initiatives to be able to educate employers of this is how you implement a policy, this is how you protect transgender people when they're transitioning in the job. These are guidelines to recommend and respect confidentiality and discretion. And what Kenya mentioned is a very good point. I think, again, these experiences that we're navigating in our own personalized transitioning in the workplace and going into LGBT-based orgs or LGBT-based work is a very different experience from someone who passes. And Michael mentioned this earlier, when you're passing and you have the safety of being able to go into the work undetected and not disclose your transgender status, it might just be safer just to not get into LGBT work in the first place. But I think it's a very similar conversation to folks who are engaging in underground economies, who may not want to disclose that they did X kind of work. And you have to be able to assess what are the skills you picked up in this work and how can you modify your resume to be able to speak to the job you're applying for versus the jobs you held. I think many people get caught up in the resume of reading it verbatim of exactly what I did, but rather focus on the accomplishments of what you learned in that position, and you can rename the position in a way that fits the job you're looking for. You don't have to exactly say that I was doing X work at this particular agency, or I was doing this kind of work at that agency. You can tailor it to be able to focus on the skills you've gained so that you can apply for a job that you feel safer and comfortable with. But it's exactly what Michael said. Applying for a job on a resume with 2 different names, or even when California with some employers where they do background checks and they're asking for AKAs or other names used and having to disclose your birth name or your legal name, it's a vulnerability, and it's something where I think we need to continue to work on. We need to implement policies to be able to ensure that these measures don't out people before they're ready to come out. And not just that, but I think in the trans movement, at least in my experience, I won't speak for everyone else, but I think there's an emphasis on passing for safety. And I totally understand and respect that. I also think that, and we should be advocating for folks who don't pass, so that even if you do everything like surgery, hormones, everything, you change your name socially, there are some trans women who will never pass just based off features. And we have to protect those folks too. And so when there's someone who isn't passing in the work, who has that experience of working in a trans community, working in underground economies, that even they are respected and they don't have to meet almost impossible standard of passing or almost impossible standard of womanhood just to be able to survive. And so I think we can do both. We don't necessarily have to do one or the other or prioritize one over the other. We have to make the world a safer place, even for the folks who don't pass, and even for the folks who aren't able to just blend in and be stealth in the workplace. And so there's so many different tangent points, and we only have so much time left. But thank you all for listening there.
And
Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on that real quick. And I know that we're at the end, but what you just said is so absolutely crucial, because we not all of us can pass. Not all of us want to pass. We want to be seen for who we are. And that's such a crucial thing. And during my intro, I know that Sera was reading it. I have a line in there that I advocate for people to live proudly and openly when it's healthy and safe for them to do so. So safety first, everyone, please, at all times.
Absolutely. Well, I know that y'all, like when we had our discussion before in preparation, we were just talking forever. So I know we could have this conversation just ongoing, but I just want to thank y'all, Luna and Michael, for taking the time out. I went ahead and put your sites for Compass's TEAP program as well as LA LGBT Center's TEAP program. So the links are going to be in the chat, but everyone, big round of applause for Luna and Michael for joining us today for today's conversation across jurisdictions. And Daniel, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great event, everyone.